Jeff Bezos, Starbucks billionaires, the corporate landlords, everybody stacked up against us, and yet they were never able to defeat us. I left the city council after a decade undefeated. I am not going there, and I wasn't elected in order to go and help administer the capitalist state just with a little more heart and a little more from the left. No, we are going there as disruptors of the capitalist state. Like, how can you keep supporting this when you're seeing the carnage play out real time on our smartphones, babies and children, the amputations, all of that, and yet they are supporting this? That can only be explained by the fact that the Democratic and Republican parties are both the parties of US capitalism, and they will support the imperialist agenda to the hilt. And that is why we are urging people that our campaign is super crucial, because it is the only campaign that is providing that is fighting for a concrete alternative to both parties of imperialism and genocide. I don't agree with a lot of the people who have been saying, public figures who have been saying, oh, well, it's a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. No, this party is pure evil because it represents a pure evil system. And so it is a fool's errand to think that there is a soul in the Democratic Party to be saved. Because let's be clear, the Democratic Party serves the billionaires and the multimillionaires who are profiting and who have been profiting not only from the widespread exploitation of billions of working class people, because that's the basis of capitalism. Profits come from underpaying labor. But it's not only that, it is much more grotesque than that. It is also corporations, and corporations meaning billionaires and multimillionaires, individuals, people who are profiting directly from warmongering and now from genocide. And it is not only your weapons manufacturers and AI companies like Palantir and Boeing and General Atomics. It is also tech companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon. It is companies like Airbnb. It's construction companies like Caterpillar. Yes, we need to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. We need to end the brutal occupation of Palestinian lands. And the only way we can do that is if the working class in the United States breaks from both parties of imperialism.
Good
Hello.
evening to you, I guess.
Yes, it's morning for you.
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning.
So we have a leftist comrade here, Zaid, from Canada, and I asked him to stay. He knows a lot about leftism, and he thinks you're great. So I hope you allow three people to ask you questions.
No, absolutely no problem.
Great, fantastic. Let's do the start. Peter, maybe you go ahead.
Yeah. Kshama, could you first just introduce yourself to the audience and perhaps start off with your current political activity? I believe you're running for office. There's also Workers Strike Back. What are the projects you're currently working on that people might get involved with?
Yeah, I'm a founder of Workers Strike Back, which is a nationwide organization of social and economic justice activists. We have a program that has been democratically agreed upon by our members nationally, which includes fighting to end the genocide and the brutal occupation of Palestinian lands, and all of that being contingent on fighting to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. We're also fighting for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. We're also calling for a $25 an hour federal, national minimum wage. And in big cities, we believe it should be at least $30 an hour. We are also strong supporters of the union movement, Workers Strike Back members, individual members. Many of them are rank and file members of labor unions across the nation. And this is the basis on which we have launched our new campaign for the US Congress. We are running against Adam Smith, a Democrat in Washington state who has been in office for nearly 30 years. He has been one of the Democrats who has backed the genocide in Gaza to the hilt. He has voted to send tens of billions of dollars, slaughter of 500,000 Palestinians already in that region. He also voted to create ICE. He has voted repeatedly to fund ICE. And as far as the genocide is concerned, last year he also was one of the Democrats who voted to ban US funding for United Nations food aid in Gaza. He has the shameful distinction of being one of the 5 remaining Democratic Congress members who also voted for the Iraq War in 2002. Many of your listeners were probably so young that they were kids or maybe not even born then. And our campaign is absolutely pivotal for the anti-war movement, for the movements of the working class as a whole, because if we are able to win this election, which we have every chance to do, we objectively, this is a winnable race. If we are able to win, this will be nothing short of a political earthquake, because a revolutionary socialist or a Marxist has never been elected to US Congress. But it's not only that we would say that in the in theory. In practice, we have seen a whole decade of me being on the city council in here in Seattle was a complete game changer for politics. In fact, as the Seattle Times, which is a newspaper of the ruling class, said, we came out of nowhere to commandeer the city's political agenda, and then we won historic victories like the nation's highest minimum wage, like the Amazon tax, beating Jeff Bezos himself, and unprecedented renters' rights. All of that can be done with even one elected office if that elected office is led by Marxists who understand that their role is to organize and mobilize a mass of working class people to win.
And if I could just with a quick follow up, I've been outside of the U.S. for some 8 years now, and my understanding of developments in the U.S. might be a little outdated or blurred from trying to follow this via the media, internet, etc. But it seemed to me like after the 2020 Democratic primary election, there was a lot of disappointment among segments of the disorganized left, and a lot of people at least talking about how they wanted to give up entirely on electoral politics and pursue other strategies like mutual aid, hopefully also combined with education and organizing. But that part I'm not so sure about. In your experience, have you noticed like a drop off in enthusiasm in volunteers, or is that just something that it's an internet phenomenon that I'm only seeing because I'm far away from the US and I'm not on the ground?
It's absolutely a real phenomenon, as you're saying, Peter, that especially after the 2020 election, but even after the 2016 election. And really, when we say election, we should be talking about the Democratic primary election that was the more pivotal event as far as people who are looking to fight against big business, fight to end warmongering, because it was the end of Bernie Sanders' campaigns both times that had a huge impact on the consciousness of the tens of millions of people who were excited about his campaign, especially in 2016. It was a new thing. Remember, I mean, it was, I was elected in 2013, and at that time it was a complete novelty for new generations. Like, what, you call yourself a socialist, a Marxist, and you got elected? How did this happen? And then I believe that our election had sort of set in motion a lot of momentum that then we really show what we did was we showed it is possible to be a self-described socialist and win an election in the belly of the capitalist beast. And I think a lot of people like Bernie Sanders, but he was not the only one. A lot of DSA members, Democratic Socialists of America members, ran for office as socialists because I think they saw that it is possible after we showed it. But the fundamental divide between what we have done and everyone else, including Bernie Sanders, I mean, now I think I heard some a DSA member claim recently that there are like 450 elected officials that they have now across the nation. But the fundamental difference between what we accomplished in Seattle with one elected position and all of these DSA elected officials put together, plus Bernie Sanders, who has a very high profile. I mean, he's a household name, and yet with all of that, they were unable and unwilling. Really, I think we have to be clear, to do anything in terms of using their public positions, using the millions of people who were wanting to fight alongside them on a program, unwilling and unable to put any of that into fruition, because in order to do that, you have to become enemy number one of the Democratic Party establishment and the ruling class as a whole. And it takes that specific quality in the leadership in order to make that happen. And it's not a personal quality necessarily, although that's important, but it is a scientific and political clarity that you cannot have a universe where you are caucusing with the Democrats, trying to keep Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and whoever else happy, and also winning victories for working people and not selling them out. Those two things are inherently contradictory. And I think the point you were making, Peter, is very crucial, is because millions of people got completely demoralized and disengaged, which need not have happened. I mean, we predicted even back in 2014. I shared the stage with Bernie Sanders at a climate rally in Manhattan in September of 2014, and I said to him that the Democratic Party will never let you carry out a political revolution against the billionaire class, because they are a party of billionaires. And we supported his campaign wholeheartedly. We campaigned for him. I campaigned for him. I spoke at both of his rallies, both in 2016 and 2020 here in the Seattle area. But what we said was that if we working class people, if we want to win any of the demands in Bernie Sanders's program, that's not going to happen through putting our faith in the Democratic Party. And we publicly at that time urged Bernie Sanders to run independently through the general election. And in fact, now, if you've noticed, many of the political pundits, people who speak for the ruling class and the Democratic Party, they had to admit that actually, had Sanders run against Trump, he would have won, which is exactly what socialists like myself were saying. But anyway, long story short, all of this has led to a real scattering of the political momentum that had been possible at the time, because of the refusal of people like Sanders and now AOC, let's be frank, refusing to actually put into action to fight for working class people. And you can see the statistics are deadly. 20 million people, nearly 20 million people, these are polls that are available publicly. Nearly 20 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 refused to vote at all in 2024. That is a big part of the story why Trump won. Why Trump won is absolutely because of the betrayals by the Democratic Party.
Zaid, go ahead.
Yeah. What kind of tact has the Democratic Party taken as it relates to your support to end the genocide? How are they addressing that obviously more radical left-wing position that can erode some of their support?
Do you mean like Democratic Party politicians and like
Well,
public figures?
Adam Smith,
Yeah.
for instance.
Yeah, our opponent Adam Smith is an out and out warmonger. I mean, he's never been an innocent bystander. And certainly, if you've been in office for 28 years, you can't with any credibility claim that, oh, maybe I was confused, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, maybe I just went along. You can't do that. And so if you look at his almost 3-decade record, it is unambiguously warmongering. Like I said, he voted for the Iraq war. He has consistently been not just on the side of the Israeli state, but very vocally a cheerleader. And I think we should also clarify in the process of the discussion that the reason it's not only the Republicans, but also the Democratic Party that is so doggedly in support of the Israeli state, especially now in the face of an international outrage and serious pressure now we are seeing on European heads of state. The heads of the capitalist states in Europe are under tremendous pressure. We're seeing this pressure play out in many other countries, including Australia, which are all, political allies of the United States. And in the United States, it is incredible. It is a historical watershed moment that the majority of working class people in the US are against genocide and oppose Israel. And if you look at the numbers of Democratic Party voters, people who identify as Democratic Party voters, 92% of them are against what is happening in Israel. And so the only way we can understand, and we have to clarify this, why is it that the Democratic Party is seemingly willing to write its own demise in favor of Israel? It's not like, oh, they are beholden by Netanyahu, or suddenly he has cast a magic spell or something like that. The only way to understand that is to understand the reality that the Israeli state from the very beginning was an outpost, a bulwark of Western imperialism. That is the role that state plays in a geopolitically and economically extremely crucial region for the United States. And when I say United States, not for the working class, but for the billionaires, the actual capitalist class in the United States, and also Western capitalism as a whole. And so for them it has been crucial throughout Israel's founding, and and that's why the Israel's founding has been so bloody from the beginning, talking about the Nakba and so on. But now especially it is very important because we are in a period of massive crisis of the global capitalist system. And so you're not surprisingly seeing major crises break out. So the US China Cold War is no longer a Cold War. It has broken out into hot wars, and this region's conflict is going to be even more sort of even play even more of a role in how that conflict shapes out. And that is why, despite all the opposition, despite everybody telling them please stop your support for this, despite the just thousands of people going to Democratic Congress members town halls and yelling them down, saying, people literally asking them, don't you have a heart? Like, how can you keep supporting this when you're seeing the carnage play out real time on our smartphones, babies and children, the amputations, all of that, and yet they are supporting this? That can only be explained by the fact that the Democratic and Republican parties are both the parties of US capitalism, and they will support the imperialist agenda to the hilt. And that is why we are urging people that our campaign is super crucial, because it is the only campaign that is providing that is fighting for a concrete alternative to both parties of imperialism and genocide.
Yeah, yeah. It's very refreshing to hear somebody like you, Kshama, and that's why we also invited you and been following you for a long time. I think people are really, really, really longing for unapologetic leftist fighters, and I've been begging for it already for many, many years in my own country. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and it seems to be most so-called leftists seem to be so embedded into the system, and we now have, for example, Jeremy Corbyn going independent in the UK. In my opinion, still way too weak on Zionism. I still do not feel that's the level of unapologetic leftism that we need, that you have. And now you have a Mamdani in the United States, another moment of people becoming very enthusiastic, and I'm afraid we're going to have an AOC moment soon with him as well. My question is, many people have been disappointed with people that gave them hope, such as a Corbyn, such as a Sanders and AOC. And what you said it just now, a lot of people are like, okay, it's not going to work through the system, forget it. So they just give up. But you actually say, no, you should still organize politically, but come with an unapologetic leftist policy and message. So am I correct to understand that you believe that it's not only organizing outside of politics, but you also need to have some kind of a fight through the system?
I would say the best way of clarifying this, which I think is really, I think, the most crucial question for clarifying here, is to understand it as you should not be, or you should absolutely not be organizing alongside or with the representatives of capitalism, but you do need to organize working class people in a way that you can concrete, and this is the key word, concretely deliver a defeat, let alone a substantial defeat, to the spokespeople of capitalism. And that is why we disagree with both things. I mean, we obviously, it's very clear we disagree with anybody who is a purveyor of this idea that somehow we are going to achieve anything through the Democratic Party, let alone something big as Palestinian liberation. I mean, I think we have to be very clear. The road to Palestinian liberation requires a break from the Democratic Party. The two things are completely linked up with one another. And so I don't agree with a lot of the people who have been saying, public figures who have been saying, oh, well, it's a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. No, this party is pure evil because it represents a pure evil system. And so it is a fool's errand to think that there is a soul in the Democratic Party to be saved. Because let's be clear, the Democratic Party serves the billionaires and the multimillionaires who are profiting and who have been profiting not only from the widespread exploitation of billions of working class people, because that's the basis of capitalism. Profits come from underpaying labor. But it's not only that, it is much more grotesque than that. It is also corporations, and corporations meaning billionaires and multimillionaires, individuals, people who are profiting directly from warmongering and now from genocide. And it is not only your weapons manufacturers and AI companies like Palantir and Boeing and General Atomics. It is also tech companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon. It is companies like Airbnb. It's construction companies like Caterpillar. So if you look at who owns the majority shares in all these corporations, it is all the same, usual suspects. It's the few billionaires and multimillionaires at the top who profit from all of this. So if a party is representing the very agents of genocide and war and destruction and misery, then it is a contradiction to expect that then you can achieve an end to the war and genocide and misery through that party. So that has to be very clear. At the same time, unfortunately, because justifiably people are angry about, and especially anti-war activists, you'll hear this from them, young people who are angry at the Democratic and Republican parties. Sometimes they'll reach the conclusion, well, they'll say, I reject electoralism. That is a word that they will use often, or I reject politics. The problem with that is that when you don't have concrete challenges to, like credible challenges like ours, where we have shown it is possible to defeat the Democratic Party. I mean, we won 4 elections in Seattle despite the whole might of the Democratic Party, first tacitly and then openly against us. Jeff Bezos, Starbucks billionaires, the corporate landlords, everybody stacked up against us, and yet they were never able to defeat us. I left the city council after a decade undefeated. We have won unparalleled victories. These such victories have not been won anywhere else in the United States. Millions of workers in the US have won higher wages, including over $15 an hour, but that was because we set it in motion. If you look at the national minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, it is still at $7.25, and the minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13. Can you imagine living on $2.13 an hour? It is disgraceful. And how is it that so many supposed socialists have won, not to mention big names like Bernie Sanders and AOC, whose fame is through the stratosphere, and they have done absolutely nothing to win any of that? And the reason I'm mentioning all of that is that because you don't have that kind of challenge that we are bringing, where concretely we are saying, let's throw this specific Democrat out of office. But it's not just about that. Let's win a position in the US Congress that can completely turn politics upside down, because we are not going there. And I said this from the time I won my first election in 2013, and I said this at my inauguration in January of the next year, that I am not going there, and I wasn't elected in order to go and help administer the capitalist state just with a little more heart and a little more from the left. No, we are going there as disruptors of the capitalist state. And it is a scientific conclusion that we reach when you look at the fact that you have the Democratic Party in crisis. And I want to state some numbers here, the kind of crisis that they are in. It's not only all the voters that they have lost, the fact that the congressional Democrats are more unpopular now than they have ever been in 35 years. Trump is unpopular, but the congressional Democrats are more unpopular than Trump, which takes some doing, because Trump is really unpopular right now. But look at the other numbers that have come out too. I mean, they are stunning. They tell you a story about the Democratic Party that we haven't really understood before. I mean, the New York Times reported this just a week or so ago, that the Democratic Party has been hemorrhaging voters since 2020. I mean, they look at it's a lagged statistic. It's almost like a longitudinal study, which is really useful, because they look at how many voter registrations have been lost by the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And they studied that from 2020 to 2024, keeping in mind that was the whole Biden presidency. It was a Democratic dominated presidency. And in that time period, 4 years, what the New York Times says, I'm using their words, is that there has been a stampede of working class voters away from the Democratic Party. And they study these numbers, voter registration numbers. They study them in 30 states. Of those 30 states, the Democrats lost ground to the Republicans in every single state in that 4-year period, and by millions of voters. And so it is an extraordinarily just incredibly demise type of situation. The Democratic Party's own pundits are saying that it's like the party has gone into a quote unquote death cycle. But the reason I'm going into all this is, here's the conclusion though. At the end of the day, despite the Democratic Party basically writing its own funeral, if you look at the consciousness of working class people, despite that, they have a high incumbency rate in Congress. Despite that, they keep winning elections. Despite that, the genocide goes on. Despite that, people are barely able to put food on the table. Healthcare is in shambles. That's the reason for that conundrum. Where how can it be that the party is so unpopular? They feel like it's almost about to die, and yet it is very much not dying. And that's the space, that's the vacuum where we need the left to present concrete challenges. So I would say that the movements, mass movements, it is obviously, movements are the basis of everything. What we won in Seattle would not have been possible without movements. But here's the deal: working class people in the United States are angry in every state. Why is it that only in Seattle working class people won something? It is not the anger that's enough. The anger is the basis of building movements, but then you need leadership to harness those movements into action. And that can only be done through concrete campaigns. And that is why it is, I would say, of anything that anti war activists could be doing today in the United States to deliver a stinging blow to the Democratic Party, it is our campaign. If we can win this campaign, if we can win a revolutionary socialist office in the US Congress, it will completely turn everything upside down. Like I said before, it will be a political earthquake. And that is why the Democratic and Republican parties will do everything in their power to prevent this from happening. And that is why it has to be a big clash. This campaign has to be a big clash between the ruling class and the working class.
Following up on that point you made about the demise of the Democratic Party, I've been watching something with kind of horror as it develops. It seems like there's enough people in the Democratic Party leadership and their backers that realize that this is a huge problem. And so now ambitious social climbers are trying to stake out positions to try to solve that without fundamentally changing, the actual policies of the Democratic Party. And I'm thinking particularly of Elisa Slotkin, who was on, she spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations last week. And she said something absolutely fascinating. She said, you guys, the people in the Council on Foreign Relations room, you guys need to care. You need to give a crap. So she used a curse word in this environment to really add emphasis to what she's saying. You have to give a crap about the middle class, because they're not going to let people in this room do what they want to do abroad unless they can live better lives than their parents. So there seems to be a recognition within the kind of elite backing of the Democratic Party that they have this problem precisely because the economic system has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse for regular people. So now she was talking about, we need to do industrial policy, and, that's all correct. But it gives me pause to see, someone who's really fundamentally on the right start to adopt some left-wing ideas rhetorically. And I'm wondering what you think the prospects are for countering this kind of movement, because it seems like they're going to try to come for the disaffected, angry people with rhetorical flourishes that sound very good to the uninformed, to the not very well informed, that might try to steal the thunder from actual left-wing challengers. Do you have any ideas about how to counter that kind of a coming strategy?
Yes, that's a very important thing about Alyssa Slotkin is a good example of she's a quintessential example of what the Democratic Party is, where they, like you said, they want to posture as friendly to the working class just in order to win elections, but substantively they don't want to change anything. And I think this is true. This is betrayed by, first of all, by the fact that the Democratic Party keeps talking about the middle class. What middle class? We're talking about working class people, and I hear that from a lot of people that that I don't understand when they say middle class, what is the middle class? Middle class was really, I mean, as you all know, as economists, it was really a very brief kind of uh, phenomenon that was developed because people were able to win a slightly higher standards of living after the boom, following the Second World War. But for the younger generations, most of that has been lost. I mean, this is now the first generation in the United States which is worse off overall. I mean, rich people have their kids are well set up, but on the whole, for the masses, the newer generations are worse off than the previous generations. And so and that situation has come about because of the fact that the Democratic Party has joined in, as much, it's not that they joined the Republican Party in destroying the living standards. They were the instigators as well. I mean, let's not forget that a lot of what Trump is doing today is based on what was done by the Democratic Party, instigated by the Democratic Party under Clinton and then Obama. I mean, obviously, Trump has gone much farther, but the reason he is able to go is because both parties are joining in this. I mean, Trump has carried out these eye-watering cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and food assistance. I mean, $1 trillion of Medicaid. I mean, this is horrendous. I mean, people are going to die because of this. But this was far from the first big attack on Medicaid and Medicare. The first big attack came under Bill Clinton through his so-called Balanced Budget Act in 1997, which slashed the budget for Medicare and Medicaid by $150 billion. And that was also the bill that opened the door to privatizing Medicare. And my opponent, Adam Smith, he was one of the Democrats who voted for that bill. And so if you look at issue after issue, the Democrats are two-faced. They and also two-faced, I would say, even barely there, in the sense that for the most part, if they are not under any pressure, they don't even talk about these things. They don't talk about the middle class, they don't talk about wages, they don't talk about healthcare. It's only when they're under pressure they'll talk about it a little bit, but then it's only talk. And so if you look at every issue, from wages to healthcare to rent, people are in dire straits. They have been for decades, but they are more so now than before. I mean, I can hardly meet a young person in Seattle, for example, who are able to afford a place of their own. Most of the time, they are roommates because that's how much rent has skyrocketed. That's you can barely afford to keep a roof over your head. But just to go back to Alyssa Slotkin, one of the things also is I'm sure you guys saw, she went on Breaking Points and tried to act like she is somehow the good face of the Democratic Party on the whole Israel issue. And she is still refusing to call it a genocide. But it's not just that. The most substantive point, and this is really, I'm coming to the actual sort of the answer to your question, Peter, like how can we counter this? That even the ones who are willing to posture a little bit to save the Democratic Party from itself, they will not say the main thing that's needed to be said, which is, I'm going to fight to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. Because if you're not willing to even broach that subject, then none of what you're saying has any meaning, because then it's just, you're just trying to make sure that you can get some brownie points for saying a few good things, positive things here and there. And so really, this is where I think, in answer to your question, I think this is where our campaign comes in as well, because there is no other campaign that is saying that there's no other candidate for the midterm elections next year, which are going to be a very crucial election, that we need to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. Because in order to say that, you have to be openly against both parties of imperialism, and virtually no candidate, and I'm saying virtually just to be generous, but really there is no other campaign or candidate that is even coming close to saying that. And that is why the only solution, the only counter to the Slotkins of this world, is to have a concrete campaign that is squarely saying, yes, we need to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. We need to end the brutal occupation of Palestinian lands. And the only way we can do that is if the working class in the United States breaks from both parties of imperialism.
That's very interesting. Just on the point about the Democratic Party, it's almost like it's the most formidable de-radicalizing institution in the United States. For those that put their faith in it and go through it, if they come out the other side, they're de-radicalized. They've been approved by Haim Saban and the donors. they've been approved by the delegates. So that's its function, essentially. It's to filter out the left, de-radicalize people, and give an appearance of democracy. And I would say a similar, I guess, analysis can apply to Alyssa Slotkin. What you're describing, and I'm not that familiar with her. However, what you're both yourself, Peter and Kshama, are describing kind of makes me think of Tucker Carlson's function right now on the right. So he kind of appears like he's criticizing the system, but he is the system. And he's actually acting like a safety valve to establish the limits of criticism of Trump, or I shouldn't even say of Trump. He doesn't really criticize Trump. He criticizes policies of this amorphous United States, the deep state as they might attribute the responsibility to, while at the same time driving support towards Trump because he doesn't criticize him as if he has no agency. And when you're talking about Alyssa Slotkin, I think of a similar phenomenon, a safety valve, a person establishing the limits of what can be discussed, but also demonstrating, you see, we really do have active debate for two equal sides, genocide good, genocide bad. So, and it goes back to our discussion about, propaganda. It's far more effective to allow some debate within established limits to give the impression of democracy, of vigorous debate, and so on. So that's just my assessment. I think it's all very interesting. I'd like to just ask a question. When you're campaigning, do you find that the potential voters are sensing the effects on domestic policy, on domestic life of Trump's domestic policy? So, for instance, you mentioned Medicaid and Medicare with his tax and spend bill, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, as well as firing a large number of public employees, both, depriving people of an income, but also making it more difficult to get what you're entitled to from the government when you call, for instance. Also undoing EPA regulations and just general disrespect of judicial rulings and whatnot. Are you hearing from either the rank and file members of the unions or just potential voters any social anger with regards to Trump's specific domestic policies?
Absolutely. There's a lot of anger, both in anticipation of how it is going to affect living standards for tens of millions of working people, but already the effects that they're facing. First of all, like as you correctly mentioned, the firing of the public sector workers. I mean, it is devastating, the kind of public sector union job losses that have happened. It's not only that the jobs have been cut, which is obviously itself, it's a full frontal attack, but it's also such a huge ideological attack against the unions. And it's like we don't want unions, we don't want union jobs. And so it has been a major backslide for the labor movement, unfortunately. I mean, just to have a sober analysis, this is a historic attack on the labor movement. And it needs to be mentioned that what is shameful, obviously the starting point of what is shameful is the attacks that have been carried out by the Republicans under Trump. But what is also shameful is that the Democratic Party has done absolutely nothing to fight against those attacks. I mean, we know the analysis of why that is true, because they are also also a party of the billionaire class. But as far as working people are concerned, they have, there's, as you said correctly, Zaid, it serves the interest of capitalism to have an illusion of debate, and so debate within this very, very narrow framework, and that's what the Democratic versus Republicans offer. So within the context of that, obviously there have been illusions in the Democratic Party among the masses of the working class. But precisely because of that, there's also anger, because people see the Democratic Party not doing anything for them. In fact, these congressional town halls that I've mentioned, it's not only that it's anger against the genocide. There have been so many Democratic Congress members and senators who've been hounded in their own town halls because they refused to fight against Trump. Because we knew for months this attack is coming from Trump. Trump made no secret. I mean, Trump loves to boast about the attacks he's going to carry out. Everybody knew this big, beautiful bill and the $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid was going to come, and then also cuts to Medicare and other programs. But the Democrats did nothing. In fact, I don't know if you all heard, but Chuck Schumer, who is an absolute tool for the billionaire class, he had this brilliant book tour I think he's back on the book tour, but originally in earlier in the summer, late spring, early summer, he had organized a book tour. He was forced to cancel that book tour because everywhere he went, people showed up and they were angry that he was doing nothing to fight against the cuts that were coming from Trump. And so I think if you do this whole sort of hall of shame for all these attacks on ordinary working people, especially poor and working class people, then the hall of shame obviously starts with Trump and the Republicans. But I think you have to put the Democrats on the same level, because really the attack started with the Democrats, with Clinton and Obama, and it's really like a continuum. I mean, the warmongering and the attacks on the working class, it's a continuum. You can hardly see, it's a seamless shift, from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush to Obama to Trump and then Biden and now Trump again. It's like it's been a continuum of attacks on the working class, and it's been warmongering nonstop. And so that hall of shame includes them as well. I do have to include also the labor leadership, and for the most part, which has done nothing to fight against these attacks, especially on the union movement. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that had the labor leadership wanted to mobilize working class people, and especially their own members, rank and file union members, into fighting both against the cuts to the social programs, but also on the just the direct attacks on the union movement by the cuts to the public sector and slashing of union jobs. I have no doubt in my mind that people would have come out in big numbers. There is just, I mean, if you come to the United States, you can, and if you're politically active, you can sense there is a cauldron of anger bubbling just under the surface. It is coming. It was also spilling out onto the surface. So we had the No Kings protest that was huge. They said that it was the largest street protest, like one day protest in U.S. history, which gives you the idea of the scale. That's how much anger there is, but there is a complete vacuum of leadership that will actually fight for something. And the reason the labor leaders don't carry out this anything like the kind of fight that they should carry out is unfortunately because they are also tied at the hip to the Democratic Party. They're also practitioners of what I would call business unionism as opposed to class struggle unionism. Business unionism is this idea that, and this is the idea that is most prevalent right now in the labor movement in the US, that your role as a labor leader is to somehow mediate for peace between the bosses and the workers. Whenever you choose that approach, it's the bosses who win for the most part, as opposed to class struggle unionism, which is you understand that the interests of the ruling class and the needs of the working class are inherently in contradiction to one another, and that it is about class war, and if we don't fight back, we have class war happening. What passes for peace under capitalism is class war, relentless class war from the bosses towards the workers. And so class struggle unionism would be that you would launch a fight back, including especially using the most important weapon at the disposal of the working class, which is strike action. And so it is astounding, it should be astounding for anybody on the left who's studying the US to conclude that despite all this anger, despite these historically horrendous attacks, yet there really haven't been strike actions to speak of. How is this possible? That's because there is a labor leadership that is an obstacle. And again, once again, that obstacle can be traced back to their ties to the Democratic Party, because part of business unionism is also not only trying to find peace with the bosses, but also being at peace with the bosses' political spokespeople, which is the Democrats and Republicans. And so that's it's been a devastating situation where there is all this historic opening for a fight back, and yet the fight back is not happening. That is the sort of the reality. And I really agree with what Zaid was saying, that the Democratic Party has a de-radicalizing effect. I mean, another way I've said that is that it's the graveyard of social movements. It really does filter out the left. But I think it's really important you mentioned Tucker Carlson as well. There are lots of illusions in him. He also plays the same role. It's a safety valve. So it's like you have a seeming debate between the so-called left and the so-called right, and you have on both sides you have these people playing the role of safety valve and limiting the terms of debate to very narrow section of these political talking points. And in reality, all of those people, the Republicans, the Democrats, the Tucker Carlsons, the even many of the progressive, self-described progressive podcasts, left podcasts, all the DSA leadership, all of them are selling out the working class in one shape or form.
Right, right. Yeah, I what I really appreciate about you is that well, like I just said, you're unapologetic. So I think people are really longing for that, especially on the left. And I think many so-called leftists don't understand that by just saying what people really want to hear, you can actually be successful. I mean, you've been winning your battles as well. And what I also really appreciate is that you tie it to imperialism and to the international class struggle. And I think that is something very new to a lot of leftists, especially in the United States, I would say. And my question is, we are now witnessing a 2 year long genocide. It's making people incredibly hopeless also around the world, to the extent that people are becoming desperate and jumping onto boats and just sailing towards Gaza. I mean, deep respect for the people who are doing that, knowing that the threat that's coming from that totally unhinged entity. And my question is, you are very successful in local organizing. You also won your political battles. How should we as leftists tie the local struggles, the local fight for a better system to the international struggle against imperialism?
I think there's sort of twofold response to your question. One is the analysis of it, which is very important. Present. One of the reasons we've been successful in Seattle is because we don't shy away from presenting a political analysis that helps people understand why they should be part of this fight, and also beyond this fight, why is this important for other working class people, and why we should have solidarity with other working class people. I think that just using what we have done is and I, as I said, it's really unparalleled. Unfortunately for us, I don't say that with any pride or joy. It is tragic for the working class that we have had an unparalleled uh, example. There should be many more. We don't, I often say that we don't have an intellectual copyright over our methods. We didn't invent these methods. These were the methods that were used in the Russian Revolution. They were used by the Bolsheviks. They were used by the Teamster organizers, Marxist Teamster organizers, who carried out the general strikes in the 1930s in Minneapolis, Toledo, and San Francisco, which was the reason the American working class won the New Deal. I mean, these methods have been used over and over again with great success. It's proven methodology. We didn't invent it, but we are using it because we come from the same school of thought. Uh, but one of the reasons we have succeeded is because through our concrete battles, we present a larger analysis to raise the political consciousness of those who are fighting alongside us. So, for example, on the city council, we obviously paid a particular focus on the economic and other issues related to oppression that affected ordinary people in Seattle itself. So for example, the minimum wage, the Amazon tax to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing, all of that. But we never shied away from taking on international questions as well, even though the Seattle City Council, I mean, technically we don't have the Seattle City Council doesn't have jurisdiction over what happens in another state, let alone in another country. However, it is still a political platform that will do two things. One is it will help educate working class people about why international working class solidarity is the underpinning of any successful sort of path towards a better society, but also because they are all, even those are concrete opportunities to expose the Democratic Party to the working class. So for example, we one of the last things we did when I was leaving office in the early December or mid December of 2023, you could, I think you could say justifiably, oh, we fought so many battles, now we could take it easy for the last month, but we didn't. The last thing we did in November was we won the second in the country resolution in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Remember, it had started happening in October. And so it was the strongest resolution by far that was calling for a ceasefire. But it was also, so again, it was an opportunity to show that we can't talk about uplifting working class people in the US unless we stand with working people everywhere, which includes the people in Palestine. And furthermore, it is what kind of labor movement would we be building if we didn't actually follow an injury to one is an injury to all, to its, to its actual spirit. And so the fight against the genocide is integral to the fight for working people in the US. And so these are the political analyses that we presented to working people here. Not that they needed much convincing. We packed City Hall for that resolution. We had over 500 people in City Hall, which is huge for a City Hall type of action. And we had people of all ethnicities, not just Arabs and Muslims, who came here, and we had lots of labor support for that. I mean, working class labor support, not the labor leadership. The labor leadership shunned it. A lot of the leadership of unfortunately, the anti-war movement also shunned it, by the way. We won because they gave various excuses. One of those excuses was, we don't want to do anything electoral, which we don't agree with. In my view, I know this might sound a little bit blunt. In my view, a lot of the leadership of the anti-war movement does not support these kinds of concrete actions, because they don't want to actually be antagonistic to the Democratic Party. Because that's what you would be. If you were supporting our resolution, you are directly against the Democratic Party, because on the Seattle City Council, it was 8 Democrats, me as one socialist, and we repeatedly exposed the Democrats by putting something concrete. See, what do you do by putting something concrete in front of them, where they have to vote yes or no or do something with it, is you expose them their actual politics. And so you can have Democrats saying, oh yes, I feel sorry for the Palestinian people, I really wish there would be peace. But then you have a resolution in front of them and you say, are you going to vote yes on this or not? And then you see them trying to carve out language that they think is too hostile to their own party. So, for example, one of the things that the Democrats removed from my resolution is the statement where we said that we need to end all US military funding to the Israeli state. But going through that process, where I mean, we didn't win that battle. They succeeded in removing it, but they were forced to vote yes on the resolution as a whole. But my point is that going through that whole battleground, where you force the Democrats to put forward an amendment to remove that language, and then I get to speak about it and say, this is what the Democratic Party actually is. Look at them. The one thing that we need to win is an end to US military funding, because without that, the Israeli state does not exist. And then they want to remove that main thing. It clarifies the role of all these people who act as gatekeepers. And so I think the bridging the local fight to national and international fights is very crucial. One thing I will say, unfortunately, in closing on that question, is that unfortunately for us, for the working class, we don't have either. We don't have the kinds of victories for locally for the working class in the way we have done, and we certainly don't have national or international significance type of things, because the Democratic Party in the U.S. Congress is so completely beholden to the forces of imperialism. So I would say that, in my view, there isn't really that much of a contradiction between doing local versus national. It's a question of what approach you use. Whether it's national or local, you do have to use the same approach that we used.
I'm wondering, you're running against a Democrat and a Republican, right?
In right so far, I mean, it's certainly Adam Smith, and he is the incumbent who's never lost an election. And then this is what's already changed. It's already, even he feels the heat. He responded to us from the day I announced the campaign. He started to attack us, which shows that he's nervous, and he should be, because we have a real shot to win. There is also, I believe, 2 Republicans who habitually run against him, who have never even come close to winning. And the truth is that the reason the Republicans have never come close to winning, the Republican Party doesn't spend too much money on this race. Why? Because Adam Smith is basically their guy. He is a Democrat in name, but he is very much follows the Republican agenda. In fact, one of the right wing, Trump supporting commentators on a show that Adam Smith went on, said, "Oh wow, he is more Republican than Republicans themselves."
Well, I asked that because it seems like, so public opinion research has shown through decades that the most people in the US have very little political information. And I think people interpret that, some people shy away from that because they think it's like saying people are stupid. I think it means the exact opposite, that people are smart. They look at the most easily available source of information, the mass media, decide this is bullshit and I'm not going to pay attention to it. But regardless of how you interpret that, how the challenge for people like us is how to get information into tens of thousands of people's heads to actually go vote. Because it seems like the best argument for the hostile takeover of the Democratic Party strategy is that you have so many people who don't know, who don't learn that much about politics, but have a kind of cultural or familial attachment to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they just vote for whatever candidate has the D or the R next to the name. So it seems like the challenge for leftists is finding a way to get information into tens of thousands of people's heads when you don't have a media empire. Because the other two parties, they'll have MSNBC, CNN on the Democratic side, they'll have Fox and the whole right-wing media ecosystem on the Republican side, but we have like very small audience, internet-based outlets. How do you get information out to people so that people who I think are latent supporters, who would be supporters if they knew of your campaign and its policies, how do you do that? How do you deliver that information?
It is absolutely the enduring challenge for any kind of actual, sort of complete left challenges. And I think you're dead right, Peter. I mean, the reason why the the spin machinery of capitalism needs to manufacture lies or even just distortions and very limited framework of discussion, all of that is precisely because working people are smart. They are able to draw conclusions, and so that presents a real danger to the capitalists. If the mass of the working class understood what was going on, which they are capable of, then it would spell real trouble. And that is why the machinery of disinformation needs to continue 24/7. So I agree with you that it's the opposite of working people being stupid. But that also means that it represents a real challenge to us. And you're right. We have to be sober in any of our campaigns, which all of which were challenging, and every subsequent campaign became more challenging because we had to face down more opposition, more attacks, and so on. Uh, but in every campaign, we didn't start out the campaign by saying we're definitely going to win. When people ask me, when people are excited about our campaign, they say, "Oh, you're going to win, right?" And I say, "Look, I can't give you a guarantee. I mean, these are elections. I mean, anything could happen. We do have a chance to win, but in order to make that happen, you will need to come and volunteer. You need to get involved." And so, really, the only way of overcoming the this sort of everything that's the political machinery that is so hostile to the left is for us to build as powerful of a campaign as possible. And that is the basis on which we have won. We that is what we did every campaign. We had thousands of volunteers who would participate, but in order to energize and mobilize those volunteers, we had to have a core of socialists, of Marxists, who were working with us, working together. I mean, in addition to having Workers Strike Back as this broader organization, we also have an organization called Revolutionary Workers, which is a smaller organization, but that is the core of building this campaign. And that is the only reason we have won every single time, because of building that so-called, what you'd call ground game. And it's sort of it's what one of my friends would call a brute force method, in the sense that there is no shortcut to getting our message out to working people. It really does depend on the actual numbers of people we end up talking to in the district, through tabling, through phone banking, through having community events, through adopting local fights that people turn up to, and then playing a role in that, and then showing that we are actually fighters and we have a track record of winning, and that's why they should get involved. So in different ways, really imprinting our campaign on their consciousness, but really by every single person that we talk to. So unfortunately, there is no other easy way of doing it. And I'll tell you also that another reason why it's challenging, especially in the early days, and every campaign of ours has started like this, and this campaign is the same, in that in the early months, we are the weapon that the ruling class and their spokespeople, which includes a lot of people who are also seemingly on the left, the weapon that the weapon of choice for them in the early days is invisibilizing us. So what you'll see is sort of Jacobin refusing to talk about our campaign. I asked them to publish the article about why I'm running. They declined. They didn't say why, but they declined. And most of the very prominent left or progressive podcasts, they don't agree to have me on. They don't talk about our campaign. And that's why it is super crucial that you have at least some of the left podcasts, including Brianna Joy Gray and many others who have talked about our campaign. But if you look at the universe of progressive podcasts, the vast majority of them are not going to cover our campaign. They don't even, and the way they do it is not by attacking me or our campaign, because that would take away from their own credibility. Because when people hear about our campaign, they are excited. They're like, oh my God, what is this campaign? Can we actually end the genocide? Can we actually win free healthcare for all? Because that's what we are also fighting for. There is super excitement about it. And so the best way for those who want to have left credentials to undermine us is to invisibilize us. And that's what they're doing. So our task is to overcome all of that. And again, like I said, it's nothing new. This is what we have done every single campaign. We are invisibilized and ghosted by the labor leadership, by most of the people who say they're on the left or progressives and so on. But then when we build momentum on the ground, it forces them to take a public position about it, because people ask them, like, what is your position? Or union members will ask their union leadership, how come we're not endorsing her? Don't we want free healthcare? Don't Doesn't our union want to fight for this? But I won't sugarcoat it. It is hard going, and that's why it's very hard to find leadership that will take these steps. However, as hard as it is, that is the only way forward. So it is important for the people who are watching this right now, your viewers, for us to understand that there is no shortcut. This is the way the fight looks, but we have to take it on, because if we don't, look at what's going to happen. You have mass slaughter of innocent people going on throughout the world, especially in the Palestine, among the Palestinian people. You have the climate crisis that sees no end. You have a system that is basically throwing our whole planet down the precipice. So we have no choice but to carry out this fight, even though it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, well, very well said. And you make a very interesting point there. It's just, it surprises me. I haven't even been thinking about that so much. Is really indeed the lack of attention for you and your movement on even independent leftist media and anti-imperialist media, I must say, on the internet. I've seen you on Katie Helper, of course. I've seen you on Biana Joy Gray, indeed. And besides that, there's not much I can think of, even though there are many, many, especially anti-imperialist channels that I often browse. It's very surprising indeed, and that also explains why I sometimes share things of you on our Substack, and I remember subscribers of ours who are actually quite leftist and anti-imperialist saying like, "Oh, never heard of her," and me being being surprised about that, especially because these are often Americans. And as we are now at the hour, I hope I can ask you one final question, and that is, we have an international audience, but also a lot of Americans, and a lot of us are desperate and hopeless. We really, really want to get out of this death spiral of our societies, of our world, so to speak. Very concretely, Kshama, what do you concretely advise them to do right now? That's number one. And number two, how can people find you?
Yeah, I think very concretely, what we have to do is to build the kind of fights that we have built everywhere else. So, just to take an example, Karim, you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn earlier, and I agree with your assessment that unfortunately, while that is a historic development that Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn have broken from the Labour Party and formed a new party. It's very important that they have taken that step, but forming that party in name is not going to be enough. The party has to be in action. And so I think concretely, if people are watching this from the UK, I think the rank and file who are going to these meetings that are being organized by your party, or whatever the name will be in the near future, I think concretely we should be asking, why isn't this party, or shouldn't this party, or we should put forward resolutions. I'm sure there's some democratic process or whatever. Put forward concrete resolutions that this party needs to organize mass rallies next month, whichever month that is, next month, and build for it in a big way. Mass rallies maybe in 10 or 20 cities, against, for example, against a genocide, calling for an end to all the military funding and military support and political support of the Israeli state. But also concretely, and this is where I'm coming to, in terms of, what is the most real thing that's happening that people can bring into the struggle, is the repression and crackdown of the anti-war activists. I mean, it is incredible the degree to which it has gone in the UK, where young people, young women who are protesting are being not only being arrested, but arrested on charges of terrorism. And there's at least one young woman who's already been in prison for a year. I mean, this is unspeakable. So it is such an incredible opportunity for this party to launch a concrete fight back against the crackdown and against the genocide itself. But it's not enough to have these sort of local meetings of this party. That's not enough. They have to organize mass action. They have to call for mass rallies, and even that won't be enough. The leaders of this new party should be putting pressure on the labor leadership in the UK, saying we need the unions to go on strike. Let's organize a one-day coordinated strike action where we shut down the profit machine in the UK. Can we organize that? So these are the types of concrete actions we need in the United States also. That is what we need. But again, it seems abstract, and it is abstract in a certain sense, because we don't have the leadership that will take this on. So I think it is going to be hard going, but it can happen if rank and file working people are willing to take action. That is the way that we have won. And I know we are starting small, but that is where we need to start. So I would really urge, especially in the United States, people, and people internationally are also welcome to contact us. We want, we are in, by virtue of being Marxists, we are internationalists by definition. And so we want to be in touch with working people everywhere, but especially in the US. For your American viewers and your American audience, I would really urge them to join Workers Strike Back right away. You can go to Workers Strike Back, all one word, .org, because we are actually building concrete fight back in many of the cities. But most importantly, I would say, and this is not out of self-importance, this is out of our actual scientific analysis of what needs to be done and what is the most important opportunity we have to deliver a blow to the forces of imperialism. It is winning this campaign. If we can move heaven and earth to win a congressional position for a revolutionary socialist, something that has never happened before, it will absolutely be a starting point for a lot of the things that can come after that.
Yeah,
and
maybe
and,
a
and
new squad.
sorry, Peter, not to interrupt you, but
Yeah, that's
just
okay.
to share concretely, because Kareem was asking me to be concretely, what I have pledged is that if we win, and I deliberately use the pronoun we, not I, because this is not I am not a careerist. In fact, careerism is the death knell of movements. That is what has happened, even through the that is also another feature of why the Democratic Party ends up betraying, because it's full of careerists who are happy enough to uphold the agenda of the billionaire class because they get to make their own careers. This is a non-careerist campaign, and I have pledged that if we win, I will turn my inauguration into a mass rally of 10,000 people in Washington, D.C., and that we will immediately bring forward a bill, congressional bill, to end all U.S. military aid for the Israeli state, and a bill for free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich. So if your viewers are excited by that message, then we need them to be part of our campaign. It's a national campaign. It doesn't matter where you live. You don't have to live in the Seattle area. It's a national campaign. We need national support. Already, within a month of our campaign launch, we got donations from every state in the United States, all 50 states, and we also got donations from Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. So we have donations from all over the country, and it doesn't matter where you are. We need your help. Fundraising, phone banking. If you can take a week off and come to Seattle, we want you to do that. So please find out more and contact us at our campaign website, which is kshamasawant.org, just my full name.org.
And you just got a donation from Hong Kong during this conversation, actually. So yeah, anyone who's a U.S. citizen or green card holder, it's really easy to find the website. I just typed in Kshama and Congress, but you could type in the actual address. Very easy to find and donate, and also consider volunteering if you're in the U.S.
Thank you so much, Peter, by the way, for the donation. I really appreciate that.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you for the fight, Kshama, and hopefully you will be more and more successful, and hopefully we will speak to you again in the future. We will keep rooting for you. Just a quick note, when we end this, please keep your browser open so it uploads for 100%, and then you can close it. I guess we can end it here. Again, thank you very much. We will be following you, and let's hope for a better world soon.
Likewise, let's hope for that. Thank you all, Peter, Kareem, Zaid. A really a wonderful conversation, and I'd be happy to be back anytime.
حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي انا حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي تكتيكي تكتكتيكي